Brian Selznick joins us to talk about his spellbinding novel, The Invention of Hugo Cabret. You have created such a wonderfully magical book here. What inspired you to write Hugo Cabret?
George Méliès had started as a magician, and then he became a filmmaker, and he used all of the effects that he did on stage on the screen. And I thought it would be really great to one day make a story about the person who made this odd little movie, and it all kind of grew from there. I thought about the picture books that I did. I thought about what happens when you turn the page in the picture book, the way stories are told. Then I thought, what if I took parts of the text out and replaced them with images so that the book itself was filled with sequences of silent movies. I had read a couple of years ago a book called Edison's Eve by Gabby Woods, and it's about the history of automata, which are these wind-up mechanical figures which play an important role in the invention of Hugo Cabret. And that's where I first learned that George Méliès had a collection of automata that were donated to a museum and eventually destroyed and thrown away. And as soon as I read that in Gabby's book, I pictured a boy finding one of those broken machines in a pile of garbage. And that's really where Hugo Cabret first appeared.
What made you choose Paris as the location for the story?
George Méliès lived in Paris, and he lost all of his money eventually and lost his film studio. People became interested in bigger, more adventurous movies than he could make. And so eventually World War I came, and Méliès just lost everything, and he ended up spending the last years of his life as a very poor man, working every day of the week in a toy booth in a Paris train station. And Hugo, who is completely fictional, was woven into that story. So because Méliès already was working at a toy booth in a train station in Paris in real life, I was able to decide that Hugo should also have a connection to that train station. And so that's how I eventually figured out that Hugo was living in this secret apartment above the train station because his uncle was the timekeeper of the train station before he disappeared.
How much nonfiction is in the story then?
There's a lot of nonfiction, actually. Almost everything with Méliès is based on fact. George Méliès, at the end of his life, sold his entire film studio, and he had a lot of extra films, a lot of his old films, and he sold them to a company that melted them down and turned them into shoe heels. And so I imagined what it would be like for George Méliès to know that his movies, what he had made, had been turned into shoe heels.
Did you go to Paris?
Because I didn't exactly know where George Méliès lived, and I just started walking down some streets and photographing doorways that I thought might look right, and I finally picked a place. And the next day in Paris, I found a book about George Méliès, and I don't speak French, but I managed to find that on the timeline it had the address of where he lived, and I was 1 block away. And so I went back and I found his real apartment, and I photographed the actual door. So when Hugo comes to George Méliès's door in the book, it's actually George Méliès's door.
How did you determine what to illustrate?
Because it's so much about cinema, and so much about cinema is about how we experience time, that the book itself has some of those elements where we move forward in time with the book.
You have created such an amazing treasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
Combining elements of picture book, graphic novel, and film, The Invention of Hugo Cabret is nothing short of a visual masterpiece.